Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my reasonably late April wrap-up. In the month of April I read 12 books, and some of those were quite thick ones, so it was a very good reading month. I largely enjoyed what I read, and I'm here to tell you all about the books. In the description box down below there will be content warnings for all of the books that I mentioned, so if you need those you know where to find them. But without further ado, let's get right down to the books. So all of the books that I read last month were for All the World's a Page, and I'll leave links to the reading vlogs where I've talked about these books down below, but I'm going to just wrap up my thoughts in this video nonetheless. So one of the books that I read was The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, and this one is a classic that follows this opera house, and in this opera house it is being haunted by a phantom, and it's all about what that phantom wants and the phantom's relationship to a certain opera singer. And I absolutely loved being able to read this one. It was such a fun read. I actually have a whole spoiler-free vlog where I talk about the book and my thoughts as I go through the process, but also I show off this beautiful edition, which is currently in its protected box right now. I really liked it. I thought it did a very good job of kind of having a haunted opera house situation. I really liked the progression of the story. In the beginning, it feels quite suspenseful, and then in the middle you start to see that it's got some more serious themes tying into it, and by the end the themes and the suspense that has been building up comes to a climax. I really liked the themes of like perceptions of beauty and humanity and kindness, and how if some of those things had been more involved, maybe the ending would have been very different. And I just appreciated that commentary and discussion that I added on at the end there. But then I really liked that for the first half of the book it just really felt more like a haunted, creepy vibe style of book. The best way that I can describe this one is kind of Dracula meets Frankenstein, in terms of it having the Dracula writing style and then some Frankenstein related themes, and it was creepy, it was atmospheric, and it was a very solid read. Then I read the book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki, which is one you might have seen around, and it's a big book. And I'm very proud that I read it all in 1 month without it being a buddy read, but I did do it as part of the Canon Gate read-along. They have read-alongs every month and I participate, and I had such a good time with this book. It kind of ticks all of my boxes. So in this one we're following Benny. He is a child and his father suddenly dies in a car accident, and he is grieving, but we also follow his mother Annabelle, who is also grieving, and they're both struggling with their grief and trying to process it, but both of them grieve in ways which are not compatible, which are not suitable to each other. So rather than being able to support each other through their grief, they end up setting each other off. At the same time, Benny starts to hear voices from the objects around him. His pencil case will talk, his bed will talk, and he can just hear all of these voices, and he's trying to deal with this avalanche of noise that is suddenly in his life. This book, Ruth Ozeki, she just has such a big breadth to this story. She's including so many different elements in it. We talk about cultural identity, seeing as Benny's father is Asian and his mother is white, and then when his father dies it kind of leaves them with a bit of a gap culturally, and Annabelle really focuses on that and brings that to the forefront. Annabelle is also a hoarder, so there's quite a lot of discussion and detail on materialism in this one. While I was reading this book I just kept on feeling like I needed to unhaul all of my books, so it does the commentary on materialism and capitalism and why we collect things very, very well. I really liked how Benny's illness and the way that he hears voices all around him could be a larger metaphor for mental illness if you want it to be, but it could also just be what it is, of the objects talking to him when he needs those voices and support, which is just so interesting. And it's not too meta, it's done in a very understandable and easy to grasp way, and I really enjoyed the way that she wove that metaphor into it. It handled the theme of grief and the way that Annabelle is experiencing the grief of her husband and the way that Benny is experiencing the grief of a father very, very well. You get to see those differences, you get to see those distinctions, but also the ways in which their grief overlaps. And it did such a good job of jumping into each of their perspectives and how what they say is not always what they mean. And you just see how they cannot communicate in the way that they want to communicate. It was a bit, pulling on those heartstrings there. The writing is captivating, it flows. As soon as I started reading this one, I was intrigued, and she plays around with the narrative voice, as in this book itself has a narrative voice, and I just really liked the way that wove into the story. I just liked everything, and I had such a good time reading this one. It is very character driven, so if you're not a character driven reader, you're not gonna love this. Not too many things happen events wise. It's really about these characters and their journey and their experiences in this one, but it does it very well. Another big book that I finally finished reading, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, and I buddy read this one with the wonderful Abby from Abbey of Pelennor. I'm so glad that I read this classic because it was so much fun. Talking about this one is going to be very difficult because it's so big, so much happens in it, but if you want the gist of the story, we follow Edmond Dante, who is imprisoned falsely for something that he did not do, and he sets out to get revenge on all of the people that contributed to him being falsely imprisoned. I'm going to talk about this book in stages because I think that's the best way to do it, as in beginning, middle and end. So the beginning, I was so here for it. This book immediately sets it off with the suspense, with action and events happening very quickly, one after the other, and it's from Edmund's point of view, so you really are in his mindset, getting his emotions and just feeling for him so much for the situation that he is put in. Then we get to the middle bit, and this is where things change tone because we come out of his personal mindset and we see things from third person through other characters, and I think that's because the revenge plot has kicked off, and therefore we as readers should not know what the revenge plot is. We kind of need to be surprised just like everybody else, and I didn't love the switch. It was a bit much for me to adjust to because I really liked Edmund as a character and just wanted to see everything through his mindset. And even though the middle does get a bit slower in my opinion, you can still see very clearly that everything is building up and amounting to something, and it does. All of the details that you get, it's worthwhile following because they all come to a boil by the end of the book. And then we get to the end of the book, which I thought was a very good, solid ending for the most part. I really liked how you get to see Edmund's character development across the beginning, middle and end, and all of the stages that he goes through in terms of revenge, in terms of right and wrong, and whether he is justified in creating justice for himself. And I just thought what is done with that storyline is done very well. By the end of the book, I didn't like Edmund as much as a character, and that largely has to do with relationships, I'll just say relationships generally, and also an adoring slave narrative which is thrown into this book. You can tell me about Alexandre Dumas' personal history, you can tell me about some of the good representation he has in here and how some of the female characters have a bit more autonomy and agency than other female characters do. Yes, those are all good things. It does not change the fact that there is and are two adoring slave narratives in this book. One of them female, one of them with a black character. And I did not like the way either of those storylines ended. And this can still be the greatest book with revenge in it of all time, and we can still acknowledge that it is racist and it is problematic in certain ways. I feel like not enough people mentioned that before I read the book. But that said, it was just such a good book. It all amounted to something. I really liked the build-up, I really liked where it went, and I really liked some of the commentary that came out of it at the end. Yes, I do think it slows down in the middle. Yes, I still think it's very much so worth reading. I read Artemis, Fowl, the graphic novel by Eoin Colfer, and this one is adapted by Michael Moreci and illustrated by Stephen Gilpin. And if you were around this channel in 2020, you will know that I read all of the Artemis Fowl books, one per month, with Gaia Athena as a buddy read, and I love that middle grade series. It's definitely one of my favourites, so I was excited to try the graphic novel adaptation and see what I thought of it. And my thoughts on this graphic novel adaptation are heavily tied in with the fact that I just adore the main series so much. It's like rereading Artemis Fowl, but it's a distilled version. I should tell you what Artemis Fowl is about actually. Artemis Fowl is a book about a teenage boy who is this criminal mastermind, and he discovers the existence of fairies, and if you capture a fairy, they can give you the ransom gold in return. So he sets out to capture a fairy and get that ransom gold, but maybe fairies have a few more tricks up their sleeve than he expects. It's kind of a massive heist story with fantasy magic elements thrown in, and I adore it, and I just really liked rereading it in this distilled version. I just thought it did a good job of keeping all of the main elements of the story, still keeping it fun, still keeping it fresh. I do think that the artwork is not particularly my favourite, but there did used to be graphic novels of these books and the artwork in that is actually atrocious. So in comparison, the artwork is much better here. This is the first and only time I've seen Holly, which is one of the fairies, black, coffee coloured skin tone, which is the way she's described in the books. If you see any of the cover designs, they all whitewash her, and I think the previous graphic novels also whitewashed her, so it was nice to actually see that visual representation on the page. I was a bit sad that Butler had hair because it's purposely shown that he does not have hair in the books, but this is me nitpicking the fine details. All in all, just a great graphic novel. I love Artemis Fowl, I love a lot of characters, and I can't wait to continue rereading this series in the graphic novel versions. I read this book all in one day. It's not very long, but it is very good, and that is Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. And I don't really know how to explain this book very well or give a summary, but what I can say is that it's just following a black family and the different roles in the family. So you get to hear from the grandparents, you get to hear from the daughter and her partner and their child, and you just get to hear from all of these perspectives. I don't really know how to summarize this one, but it was very good. I just think it did such a good job, kind of like the book of Form and Emptiness, of showing a situation and then getting into each and every single one of those characters' heads, and so therefore you can understand the reason why they react the way in which they do to that situation. And even if you see their reactions through another character's perspective and you disagree with them or you don't like them, as soon as you jump into their mindset, you kind of understand and relate to them a lot more. So I just thought that was done very well. It's a black family, and there's also some themes of religion in this one, some themes of queerness in this one, and what can I say? It just tied it up and did it all very well. I was just immediately immersed in these characters, in their family, their dynamic, and what they were doing with their lives. It's told in a series of like vignettes, so they're very short chapters. You can just speed through this book. It's well worth your time, it's well worth picking up. I think it's time to talk about all of the young adult contemporary books that I read. I was in a very young adult contemporary mood. It's just slowly been accumulating as the months have gone on, just more and more young adult. And I've currently fixated upon Morgan Matson. I just keep reading all of her books. So one of them that I read is Second Chance Summer. And this is actually my favourite Morgan Matson book that I've read now. I just had such a good time with it. So in this one, we follow a family and they are going to their summer house, which they haven't been to in several years. And they're going to actually be spending their summer holidays together, because usually the kids go off to camp and the parents do different things. But this time they're spending summer all together because their father is ill. And by going back to the summer house, our main character is going back to a place where she used to have a boyfriend and she used to have a best friend, but something happened and their relationships fell apart. This one spoke to me a lot personally because it related to some of the experiences that I have had with cancer and terminally ill family members. So I thought it just depicted that in terms of my experience with that very accurately and just emotionally very well. And even though this book is focusing on grief and the family's relationships and dynamics and the ways in which they are trying to prepare themselves for the grief, but also show each other that they love each other as much as they can before their time runs out, it also really has those summer holiday vibes in the story. And I'm amazed that Morgan Matson managed to balance the emotional, difficult side of this with the happy summer vibes as well. It did a good job of also including a romantic storyline, but equally also focusing on a friendship storyline. I just love the way that Morgan Matson makes sure to usually include both in all of her books. And while the big mystery of what went down that summer, which ruined their relationships, was quite underwhelming and didn't really seem like a big deal, it just seemed kind of pathetic if I'm being honest, I still liked seeing the ways in which the characters either managed to overcome their past or like look at it and examine it and see how they could move forwards. So I really did just enjoy this contemporary book, and if you are going to pick up a Morgan Matson, I just recommend this one because it was fantastic. I also realised at this point that I've read enough Morgan Matson books to recognise the things that appear across all of her books, and you can definitely see what she as an author likes. So I read another one, because if you're enjoying an author, why not keep reading their books? And I read Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Morgan Matson, and this is actually her debut novel, and it shows. So in this one we follow our main character who is grieving once again because of something that happened with her dad, and it involves her. And she needs to get this car from where she is to the place that she is moving with her mother. So she needs to drive this car all across certain states to get there. However, she does not want to drive a car. So her mum makes this teenage boy drive her instead. And so they go on a road trip to drive the car to where it needs to be. But they decide to take a bit of an epic detour, hence the title. And while I did still like reading this one, I do think you can see very clearly that this is her debut, because I've been reading her later published books and she takes all of the themes that she has in this one and she's refined them and she's perfected them and she's made them all the more emotional and more emotionally charged. Whereas in this one, everything just felt a little bit surface level and basic to me in comparison to her other books. It still has a good job of focusing on the romantic storyline, and while that is quite forefront of the book in this one, I don't really feel convinced about their feelings towards each other. I feel like there was just too much quiet between them and not enough connection for me to really believe in their romance. So I think the romance fell a little bit flat. It was nice to see the road tour. It was nice to learn things about American states that I just did not know. I don't know that much about the states, to be honest, and how they differ from each other. So that was a fun time. But also, personally, road trips are not necessarily my favourite books. So I was a bit out of tune with the book on that level too. And I just felt very frustrated by the end because it seemed so unfinished. There was mentions of a friendship storyline, but that was unfinished. There was mentions of some tension between her and her mother, but we never got to see the outcome of that. And just by ending it where it ended it, I just felt like this book could have given me a whole lot more. The best thing that this book did though was the Grease storyline. It handled that quite well, and I liked seeing how she worked through those emotions and came to terms with them. So even though this one wasn't the best Morgan Matson, I still think it's a fairly decent read, and if you start here, you're only gonna enjoy the rest of her books more and more. I think then I read the only book that I didn't actually like this month, and that was Burn for Burn by Jenny Han and Siobhan Vivian. This is one of the oldest books on my TBR. I'm going through a journey to read the 10 oldest books, and this is one of them. In this one, we follow these girls who all want to get revenge on this boy for something that he did in school. So it's a secondary school one, it's a revenge story, and it was just very, very juvenile. I just could not get behind these characters and these girls, except for one. Most of them felt very, very mean and just kind of annoying, and I just could not get into their mindset. I just could not care about them, could not relate. They are different to me. They are rich kids. They are like stuck up and not my type of people. So I just could not get behind these characters. And then secondly, the reason why they want revenge is just a bit, it's not ridiculous actually. I don't want to remove the seriousness of the situations, but they kind of held back why they wanted revenge for a bit, and then once it was revealed, I was like, really? Is that why you need revenge? And the way that they handled the revenge, in my opinion, was just not very smart, and I was just like not really on the girl's side throughout this. Or if I was going to be supporting them wanting to get revenge, I would have wanted them to do things in a better manner. Basically, I could have done what they were doing but way better, and that niggled at me throughout the whole book, especially as I didn't even like these characters to start with. So mostly I just found this book very annoying and juvenile and a bit ridiculous, and then it ended on a cliffhanger, and I realised it was a series, and I thought I cannot read any more of these books, so this was a no-go for me. I then proceeded to read one more young adult contemporary book that month, and this is Scars Like Wings by Erin Stewart. This is the proof copy, which is why there's no title, and this one is following a girl who is a burn victim. Her house was on fire and her family passed away in the fire, but she survived, and she has been homeschooled since the incident because she's been going through surgeries, because she's been healing and kind of trying to process her trauma. But now her therapists say it's time for her to go to school for the very first time, and it's about what happens when she goes to school for the first time. This is not an own voices story, by the way, but personally I thought it was a very, very, very good read. Obviously, it deals quite heavily with grief because she has recently lost her family in the fire, and as well as that, the people that she's living with lost one of their family members in the fire. So they're all kind of grieving in different ways. You can see that I read a lot of books about grief. Yes, I do. And I just thought it handled that storyline very well. As for the disability rep, I was quite happy and pleasantly surprised to find that there's a secondary character who's a wheelchair user. I'm always on the lookout for wheelchair user representation, and it was just really nice to see it. And from what secondary experiences I've had of being a carer for someone in a wheelchair, I feel like the depiction of that disability was quite accurate. I can't speak for burn victim accuracy, but the way that it was written kind of shows me that it was very well researched, and I believe in the representation. I tried to find some own voices reviews and everything seemed fairly positive. I didn't see any criticisms of the representation around, so I'm kind of glad that there was some accuracy, some research done and put into this book. I do think that at the beginning the main character could seem annoying to some readers, but she did not to me, because she's going through a very, very tough and difficult situation, so I do not blame her for the way she was acting whatsoever. And it was just nice to see a love of theatre in this one and how much she really enjoys that hobby and is going for it. And by the end of the book, I just felt so uplifted and my heart was so full and it was so heartwarming that I was just like, ooh, this book is moving me. So I think it's a very good young adult contemporary, but do go in being aware of the fact that it deals a lot with trauma, it deals a lot with perceptions of yourself and perceptions of beauty and the way that other people treat you as someone who is visibly and obviously disabled. Yeah, it did things very well. I really liked the handling of the friendship in this one, but also in terms of just all relationships, because the way the relationship between her newfound family and her is going through the motions and going through some emotions, so it was nice to see that unfold as well. A very quick read and a very good one in terms of representation. I also read a memoir. I listened to this one on audiobook, on script, and you can get a few free days if you click the link down below, and it'll give me some free days as well, so it's one of the ways you can support my channel. But I listened to Hunger by Roxane Gay, and this is her memoir about her body and her relationship with her diet and eating. And it was a very, very good memoir. It really opened my mind to lots of things and struggles and trials that people with larger bodies, fat people, face that I don't face personally, and I would not even have thought of to think of in terms of making them comfortable, in terms of the ways in which people treat them differently for having a bigger body. These are things that I had never personally thought about, but believed somehow that I had thought about before. So it was nice to have this memoir open my mind and kind of teach me new things that I didn't know about a lifestyle that affects a lot of people and the way that people are treated and the way that fat phobia is enacted in certain places, so that I can push against it myself as well. Roxane Gay is a black person and also a queer person, so you get some of those elements into her storyline, especially when it comes to her body, her sexual identity and her family and culture and how those all tie in together. I thought that was very fascinating and interesting to learn about too. I will say that the beginning of the book did feel a bit repetitive, especially just the first part. It was a bit too repetitive, it was a bit too trying to be poetic, and it lost me a little bit there in the beginning, but if you just push through that, it gets to the heart of things and it's very emotional and worthwhile your time reading it. She does talk about a situation that you might not expect from the synopsis that I just gave you, so I'll leave a content warning for that in the description box down below, and it'll be the first content warning that you get in that line of content warnings. It's quite a big theme in the story, and it kind of took me by surprise, but as it's not one of my personal triggers I didn't mind, but I think it's something worth knowing before going in. And yeah, a memoir that I really recommend. Speaking of non-fiction, I read this cute little book which is called Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Wise and Old. So Old and Wise by Katherine Rundell, and this is an essay about why it's important to read children's fiction, middle grade books, young adult books. It talks about access to them and how everybody should have access, and then discusses libraries and the ways in which free access to books is difficult. And it also takes the time to mention the importance of seeing yourself and seeing other identities in books as well, so talking about diversity and some stats and statistics around that. And I'm happy to say that I agree with literally every single word that she writes in this essay. I think she does a very good job of describing the essence of why it's still important for adults to be reading young adult and children's fiction, as well as, you know, young adults and children reading it themselves. And as someone who does read both of those age audience categories, it just makes me happy to know that this essay is out there for adults to read and to maybe venture into those books a bit more themselves as well. Last but not least, the last book that I read last month was How Beautiful We Were by Imbolo Mbue, and it follows this community in Africa, and they are just living their lives when a corporation comes onto their land and says they own it, and they start to extract the oil from the ground, in turn polluting the area in which this community live, and their children gradually start dying, and the people have had enough. They are ready to fight back. And it's about their protesting and their fighting back and the form that it takes. I started off really loving this book, but then as I went on, I do think this one lost steam in certain places. What I really liked about this one is the writing. Oh my goodness, the writing is absolutely beautiful and just immediately took me into that setting, took me into that community, took me into all of their practices and cultures and ways of living, and just kept me there. The writing does that so very well. And we follow a few different characters over this one, but one of the perspectives that we return to is the perspective of the children. And it's a collective we in this perspective, which I thought was very powerful, as it's the children who are very much so suffering from the pollution and losing their lives, and just seeing how they refer to themselves as one entity was just really interesting and intriguing and added to my reading experience. I do think that this one sometimes got a bit too slow. The pacing of this one is very slow, and in the beginning I didn't mind it because while it was slow paced, a lot was still happening, so it was keeping me intrigued. But then by the halfway mark, less things were happening, and what was happening started to get a bit repetitive, so that's when the slow pace started to really kind of niggle at me and impede my reading. And every time I put down this book, I didn't feel a pull to pick it back up again, but when I did, I had a good time. It just wasn't sucking me in the way I would probably like a book to be able to. And the ending as well just kind of fizzled out rather than brought everything back to life, so it just really was like going a bit downhill and just ended into the ether rather than bringing me back up to that full circle of feeling. So I think it lost me a bit with its slow pace and its ending, but otherwise I do think this book is very important, and while it's not a favourite of mine, I would still very much recommend it in terms of thinking about the environment, the impact that it has on the lands in which the oil is being taken out of, and the way that it's affecting these cultures, their lives, and the way that they experience their perception of the world at large. So I do think it's one that I'm going to be recommending, regardless of the fact that I thought it was just a middle of the road reading experience for me. There you have it. Those are all of my thoughts on the 12 books that I read in April. Please let me know in the comment section down below what was your favourite recent read. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!